So Tim and Chris Stamper, the founders of Rare, you were working at a music store, and they came in, right, as I understand it, and asked you to demonstrate a music computer, right? It was a Yamaha CX-5 or something?
The Yamaha CX-5, yes. I also had a Korg Poly 800, Korg SQD1, which was a very early sequencer, and I also had a Roland R8 drum machine as well.
Uh-huh. And so they asked you to do a demonstration, and they also just had regular instruments at this music store as well, and you already had a musical background, yeah?
Yeah, well, when I started there, I was demonstrating drums, and they were on the top floor. It was quite lonely up there. And downstairs was pretty much everything else. The guitar. Oh no, the keyboards were upstairs as well. Sorry, the guitars, the basses, and a few keyboards. Probably the home keyboards as well. They were all downstairs. So the general stuff downstairs, and the keyboards and the drums were upstairs. But when they got this Yamaha CX-5 computer in, obviously it was they made quite a big deal of it. Yamaha must have been putting some serious money behind it, and they convinced us to have a very prominent position downstairs, and they brought it in, and nobody knew how to use it. And I was kind of anti-computers at the time. My father used to lecture in computers, very computer orientated, and playing drums in a punk band, which I'd done previously. I was kind of anti-establishment at that point, but they brought this thing in, nobody knew how to use it, so I took it home, worked out how to use it, and it had MIDI on. And I connected it up to lots of MIDI keyboards and got it all working. So consequently, I was selling quite a lot of gear at that point.
You had like a punk background. You were, and that's what you were. That was the kind of music that you came from?
Originally, I had piano lessons as a kid. Let me see, or probably as a child. I was about 8 or 9 years old, and my brother was having piano lessons, and things weren't quite as financially good then. Although we had a piano, I had to wait 2 years before I could start my piano lessons, because obviously there were budgets and stuff. And because I really wanted to learn, I'd sit there and work it out myself. And after I did piano lessons for a little while, and then I decided I wanted to play the trumpet, and I went and played with a brass band. Whilst I was playing in the brass band, I thought that's not really rock and roll enough, the trumpet, so I decided I wanted to play drums. And then when I was playing drums, and I was working upstairs at the music shop, I decided I didn't like being upstairs. I wanted to be probably downstairs. And obviously when they brought that computer in, it was an opportunity for me to be a little more sociable, because it was quite isolating being upstairs, just waiting for people to come up. And drums, although everybody needs a drummer, it wasn't that popular, and even less so now.
So ironically, computers, which one might think computers were kind of a less social sort of device,
yes,
was actually for you was actually more of a social device.
Absolutely, it's just because when I was at that music shop, I could be downstairs and talk to lots of people, which I did, and sold lots of these computers and keyboards and drum machines. As Yamaha said, it was the future, and it turned out to be.
Now, so the Stamper brothers came in, and they asked you to demonstrate the computer. And so you played them I guess you played them a piece of music that you had composed on this computer?
What I was doing, I was demonstrating lots of things from that era. So probably some Phil Collins stuff, Go West, Genesis.
You were demonstrating popular music on the computer.
Popular music, yes. And then I kind of ran out of the popular stuff, because... And they said, have you got anything else? So I embarrassingly said, well, I've got some stuff that I've written. So, well, can we hear that? And so I played it to them, and they I think Chris turned to Tim and said, "Oh, monsters." So I asked what that meant. I was a bit confused, and then Tim said, "Oh, have you got an office?" So we went upstairs, and I thought, "Oh, great! I've signed yet another person up on finance who's going to buy one of these computers and some more gear," because it was quite it was, in those days, the music equipment by comparison was very expensive to how it is today. So a lot of people got signed up for this stuff on finance. So we went upstairs, and I was thinking, oh, great, sold another system, get in, and they offered me a job.
Do you remember at all what the original piece that you played them was like?
No idea. No, it was, decades ago, so I've got no idea. But obviously it sounded like Monsters. But whatever it was, it seemed to work.
you don't even remember if it had maybe a video gamey kind of sound to it or something, or?
Well, I wouldn't have known what video games were then. So
right.
I thought it was modern 80s inspired type music.
Is that sort of what, when you were starting to compose music, was that sort of what you were attempting to emulate when you were doing, your original works? Was just 80s sort of synth stuff, or?
Yeah, well, I was playing in original bands at that time, and I managed to get hold of a DX21 because I couldn't afford a DX7, so I got this DX21 and a Roland Juno 106, and I was playing in an 80s type band, and we were seeking fame and fortune, which didn't come via the traditional let's be a rock star route. So so it was that kind of stuff. I was trying to emulate 80s kind of popular music.
Right. Now, being a musician and then kind of not really being as familiar with computer stuff, was it hard for you to learn how to compose music in hex code and that sort of thing?
Yeah, I mean, when I went to work for Rare, I got this sequencer called the Korg SQD1, and I could use step time coding, or I could play something and it would play it back. And the good thing about having a sequencer like that is I was playing in a band, or an original band, and if I took ideas into the band and they didn't like it, that's as far as it got. Whereas if I played something into my sequencer, it would play it back to me, and I could develop it some more from there.
Had you already, when you were working at the music store, had you already figured out how to compose stuff in hex code? Or was that
no. What happened was, I went to work at Rare, and I spent, the first 2 weeks playing Super Mario Brothers, and then the next 3 weeks after that, just writing some stuff for a game that they were working on. And I used the sequencer, the Roland drum machine, and the Korg keyboards, and my other keyboards as well. And I also had a Roland MT32, which was like a sound card, and I can remember writing lots of demos and being very inspired and have got all these great sounds. Mm-hmm. And then having got that, they said, yeah, that sounds good, but it's got to go onto this, the NES, which is a glorified doorbell with 4 noises on it. 2, I think it's square waves or pulse width modulation waves.
Right.
Triangle wave, which sounds like an owl hooting, and a little noise channel as well. And trying to convert things to sound good on that was very much a challenge that lasted several years.
So your first game was Slalom, right?
Indeed, yes.
How did you approach writing this as your first piece? I mean, did you have a particular approach, or did you just... Well,
they had, in fact, the first piece that I wrote, I can remember sitting there going, I don't like this, I can do much better. Uh-huh. And I wrote another one, and it just needed to travel, really. But again, it was trying to work out a system where, using such a limited system, you could actually get something that actually worked just using the 4 sounds that you had to play with. So it's more of a technical challenge rather than something musical, really. It was what works on a 4-bit sound chip.
Right. I'm going to play the music from Slalom, and if you want to just comment over it and describe how you, describe your experience composing this, I guess.
So this sounded great on my synths.
Yeah.
So this kind of worked, the bass line. But a lot of the 80s stuff was like these big, huge chords using kind of synth brass sounds. And it worked on Junos and Korg keyboards. But here it was very static.
And
the
again,
long notes don't work. Yeah, long notes really don't work.
And again, you're emulating sort of 80s synth pop, basically.
That's what I was trying to do. Yes, yeah. Absolutely. But again, it doesn't really work on a 4-channel sound system. So that's when you learn that you have to adapt and do something different.
Are you not? I mean, this is actually one of my favorite pieces of yours. Actually, do you not think as highly of this piece of music these days? Or
I think it's completely underwhelming.
Yeah.
So, I mean, have you got? I don't know if you've listened to a game called Time Lord.
Oh yeah, certainly.
Oh, yeah.
Certainly have. Yeah.
Yeah, that would probably be a good example. If you listen to that one, it works well on keyboards and a big thing, but on a 4-bit sound system it doesn't. And the whole point about music is it needs movement, especially when you've only got 4 notes.
Right.
By the time I got to the theme tune for Time Lord, I learned a lot from listening to the Japanese-inspired NES games.
Well, that's yeah. I mean, actually, that brings up. I mean, that's something I was going to ask you about. Was that it feels like every European composer or Western composer, they're very much a similar sound, and you're the only European or Western composer that doesn't sound like the other European composers. So there's something that is known as the arpeggio effect in chip music, which is that they'll play a bunch of notes really close to each other to simulate a chord being played, and you're the only Western composer, it seems, during this era that didn't use the arpeggio effect. Why is that? The Japanese composing style doesn't use it either, and so what's going on with that?
It was probably my ignorance.
Oh, really? Okay.
And I didn't have any. I didn't when I first started writing video game music. I didn't really have that many people to listen to or compare myself to, so I was completely making it up as I went along, and I was just approaching it as a technical challenge. How do you make this 4-channel thing sound better? Most of the people I listened to were from Jaleco and Nintendo, who could actually make that 4-bit, that 4-channel sound chip sound quite good. So they were probably the inspiration and the driver for me to try and improve.
So you hadn't heard any any computer game music, and none of you hadn't heard any of the European stuff anyway. Basically, your first your introduction to video game music was Japanese stuff that the Stamper Brothers had shown you, I guess.
Yeah, Super Mario was my first introduction. Apart from Ping Pong, which was an earlier Atari game, that was probably a couple of years before that. It was Super Mario, which was my first introduction to Japanese game music, on the NES and on arcade boards as well. Okay,
so aside from the 80s sort of pop thing, you were also emulating stuff you'd heard from these Japanese games.
Yeah, I mean, I think at the time we didn't realise how clever Super Mario was. And also, I wasn't that into jazz at the time, so I didn't quite understand the connotation or the context. But it's a really well-written piece of music. It done extraordinarily well, Koji Kondo, and hugely influential and inspiring as well.
Now, did you eventually listen to Commodore 64 or European-style stuff?
Eventually, but I haven't listened to much of it. I'm aware of it, but it's not something didn't excite me, to be honest.
Yeah, okay. But you were excited by the Japanese style.
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, it just seemed to be more polished to me. So I'd listen to the stuff that I'd be excited by. Whereas I suppose the Commodore stuff, it had a certain sound and some of it was good, but it wasn't stuff that I'd aspire, and because I wasn't writing on that system either, I'd rather listen to the stuff that I needed to, that I was in direct competition to, rather than something that I wasn't. Yeah.
Now, it feels to me, during the Nintendo era, that you can always tell when something is a David Wise piece. Your 8-bit style is just very unique, and it's hard for me to articulate why, but it obviously doesn't sound like a typical Western style. It sounds more Japanese, but it doesn't quite sound like the Japanese stuff. How did you develop such a singular sound in your music? I mean, or is that something that you might not be able to answer yourself?
I probably could answer it myself. I think when you listen to any composer, and you listen to them, there's obviously certain things that they fall back on and do and repeat, probably subconsciously. When you listen to Hans Zimmer, you've got a good idea it's Hans Zimmer, and the same with James Newton Howard and Harry Gregson Williams. When you listen to their stuff, you think, oh, that's that composer. So they must have these kind of unique signatures throughout their music that, and the way they produce the music, that informs you that it's probably that composer.
There's almost there's these ghostly melancholy kind of melodies that you tend, it seems at least, that you tend to use in your music. Is that a fair description, or is that
no, it's a fair description. Yeah, I like music that isn't overly, let's say, cheesy or happy.
Yeah.
Overly happy. It's nice when music's got a bit of depth to it and makes you think. Or at least that's, hopefully it does anyway. That's the idea.
And even during the Nintendo era, during the 80s, that was something you were conscious of?
No, not really. I was just writing music that I like. Oh, I suppose, going back to when I was younger, you're writing music. Hey, look, I don't know, I'm writing music and I want everybody in the world to listen to it.
Yeah.
At some point, I didn't realise how many people were listening to it. But you're kind of writing stuff that excites you or gets you, gives you an emotional bit of feedback. So hopefully by doing that, somebody else might get that as well.
Just out of curiosity, was New Age music an influence at all?
No.
Mm-hmm.
Quite simply. Not at all. I've read an interview once that somebody said it was New Age, and I'm not really quite sure what New Age is, because that's going to change, isn't it, over time?
There is New Age. There's I guess, I don't know how I would describe it, but it's more meditative type of music, I suppose, But I feel like there's this quality in your music that feels New Agey almost. There's a meditative kind of quality. But, a lot of your music seems to have reverb or something like reverb on the melody. What attracted you to using reverb?
So on which system?
For Nintendo.
No, it was programmed in the reverbs and the delays. So it was a mathematical solution. Because obviously, when you've got a bit of, I think the difference between Slalom and Time Lord is that I'd learnt to manipulate the sound chip a lot more. It took a lot more work, but the whole point of music, the thing that makes music work, is to put movement into your music. Therefore, putting delays in gives it a bit of, it makes it sound bigger, it gives it movement, it bounces along quite nicely. And you can hear the difference between Slalom and Time Lord with the progression and giving it movement and making it sound bigger than just pressing a note, and hopefully that's going to do, because when you've only got 4 sounds to deal with, it doesn't. You've got to do something with it. All of the reverbs, all the delays and that kind of stuff, that was all programmed in and worked out very mathematically, because as you say, going back to those hex kind of programming things, everything was programmed in, so there'd be a lot of working out where the delay should go and then working it out from there. So it was very involved, very intensive problem solving.
That was all done to make the music more dynamic. That's why you employed reverb and delay.
Yeah, it's to make it sound better. 'Cause if you play a note, that's it. But if you play a note and then add a delay, it sounds bigger and more full. It gets your interest. Your brain picks up on it and goes towards it. It sounds prettier, for lack of a better word. And the more you can make your music sound nice, the more people hopefully would want to listen to it.
Now, there's this sort of, I feel like one of your signature moves is there is a sort of delay reverb thing that happens in the melody. I'm going to just play a little clip of it, and I'm just kind of curious about how what is going on here compositionally, and or at least as far as the programming goes. Let's see. So this is from WWF Wrestling Challenge. So you hear how there's a sort of this kind of delay kind of sound to the melody. What are you doing there compositionally? I mean, how do you achieve that sound?
You've got, I think it's an 8-bit system, so you've got 7 different volumes that you can use. With any delay, you hear the initial, and then there's you put it ghost notes, so you'd probably be using volume 4 and volume 2 after that. So you'd be working out where the delay might want to go, and you'd probably put it in thirds to offset it, and then you'd put it in where you want it to go, and then you've got other notes coming in, so you'd write your melody out, and you'd write where you'd want your delayed notes to go if you had space for them, and then the main melody would always overrule the the delayed notes. So although you'd worked it out for everything, you'd have to prioritize what you could hear and what the channel would be doing. Quite involved.
How long did it take for you to master that technique?
It was built up over probably years of working, certainly months.
Yeah. Another signature move of yours is using it's what it sounds like explosion noises. You know, does that ring a bell at all? I can play a little sample of that as well. You hear this? So you hear that kind of explosion? It sounds like an explosion noise. It sounds like. Or?
Yeah, that was the sound chip on the NES. It was very limited. You had different flavors of white noise or pink noise, whatever it was, and it was. I mean, ideally, that would be a distant snare with lots of reverb on, and that was the closest I could emulate using that sound chip.
So this was really meant to sound like a snare drum, then.
Or a very deep snare drum, or maybe even I don't know, taiko or something like that, just sort of in the distance with lots of reverb on. But not having the facility to have samples and big reverbs, I would have to make do with and that's what you got.
Well, I guess what I'm wondering is, so that wasn't meant to sound like an explosion noise. It was.
No. It was meant to sound like an ambient drum in the distance.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah. I was just curious about that because I thought it was an interesting choice, and I like it, even if it was intended to sound like some sort of explosion noise.
I think as an analogy, if you were listening to a snare with lots of reverb on that was put in the distance, it would perhaps sound like a bit of an explosion in the background, and that's kind of, explosive type sound is what you're trying to achieve.
Right.
The other thing as well there is that sound would have been used for the explosions anyway, so by association it would sound explosively because the explosions were using that sound as well.
Yeah, right. You did the music to every Rare game that came out for the Nintendo?
Most of them. I think there was probably a couple I didn't, but I don't know which ones they were.
You were the only composer at Rare, right, for a while?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there was one game that they put out that was probably done by an external studio, and therefore I wasn't responsible for the music. You
were the only composer at Rare until what year? Until
I can't remember.
Yeah,
I've got no idea. I've timelines and things. I'm not
sure.
Not aware of until Robin Bingham came along. Evelyn Fisher, in fact, she was the first one.
Oh, sure, right. Now, different publishers, did they give you different budgets? And with the budgets that they gave you, well, how did that work? I mean, you were developing,
I worked for Rare, so as far as publishing and costs go, I would have never been privy to that kind of information, so that would never have, I wouldn't know.
So different publishers didn't have any effect on your work, or like the amount of time you would have on a game to work on a game, or even affect the quality at all?
No, not really. We're often very busy, and sometimes I'd do a whole soundtrack in a week, which was heads down 12 hours a day for 7 days. And but you can't keep that up. So most of them were probably done in 2 or 3 weeks.
Mm-hmm. But there was no correlation, and you weren't conscious, at least, of the publishers that you were working.
No. All I was given was a deadline that we really did need to meet, because obviously the budget was time rather than financial. So there'd be another one waiting in the wings in about 2 or 3 weeks' time. So I'd need to get on and finish it.
Did you notice, I guess, after a game did come out, did you notice any kind of similarity feedback to games that were from a certain publisher, or that were made for a certain publisher? For example, LGN, were there, and also that was another thing, is like, did certain publishers get involved? Did they ever have notes for you as a composer when you're working on games, or were all the notes just coming from?
They're just coming from Tim and Chris. So
right.
What they asked me for, I'd get on and do it as best as I could. So if there was any background stuff going on, then I was never aware of it.
And there were never any instances of, to your knowledge at least, about publishers making things more difficult for Rare and so forth?
I'm sure
easy?
they might have done, but yeah. I was again, shielded from all of those management discussions.
Mm-hmm. I have a specific question about Nightmare on Elm Street. This is track here. There's this thing that happens in it where there's a shift at one point in the piece and it becomes sort of more atmospheric at one point. I'm kind of curious about what your decision was to do, or like where that came from exactly. Here, I'll play the track real quick here. So things are kind of going along and stuff, and at a certain point, there's going to be this shift all of a sudden, which is really interesting. I think it's coming in a bit here. Right about here. So, what's going on here? What?
It was probably related to the gameplay.
Okay.
I would imagine. Without seeing it in context, I wouldn't be able to comment. Maybe there's two tracks that are being concatenated together.
I mean, then it goes back into sort of the original.
Okay, I don't know. Again, I was asked to reference the original score as well. So it might be because of that.
Okay, yeah. There's something that's sort of similar that happens in a piece from Donkey Kong Country, which I'll play for you in a little bit. But yeah, I was just kind of curious about that. Why there's this mood shift and it becomes more atmospheric. But yeah.
No idea with and again, long time ago. So
yeah, right.
You said you had to reference the score of the movies?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'd have the score to reference, and we needed to keep some semblance of reference for the movie.
Oh, okay.
We'd have to do that for that film, and also Who Framed Roger Rabbit, and a couple of others.
Did you see Who Framed Roger Rabbit? Did you watch that, by the way?
Yeah, I did watch it. Yeah, and fortunately, Alan Silvestri, his management company, sent me the score as well. So that was very good.
All right.
So we got all the music and the score long before the film came out, which is good. Very interesting. Good learning tool.
Okay, there's a track in Battletoads. It's called Arctic Cavern. I could play it for you too to refresh your memory.
Yeah, because with all tracks, what they're called or referenced as will be completely different to what I remember them as.
Right. So, but there's a track that sounds very similar in the game Digger T Rock.
Okay.
So this is the track in Digger T Rock here. Let's see here. So right, that's the track in Digger T Rock, right?
Yeah.
Oh, here's this part too. And then in Battletoads, there's this. So it's basically, it sounds like a variation, right? So
it is, yeah.
What was that about?
I would not know unless it was specifically asked for. It sounds quite intentional.
Yeah, right. And Battletoads came out, I think, a year later than Digger T Rock. It almost sounds as though, well, it sounds like the Battletoads one was maybe a little more developed version of the Digger T Rock. Do you remember at all? Was like the Digger T Rock version a sort of unfinished? Was that like an unfinished track that you had to put in the game, and maybe due to time constraints, that's what you were able to do, and then wanted to show off a final version in Battletoads? Or do you know what the story was behind that?
No, again, it comes back to you're asking me questions about stuff that was done really quickly,
Yeah,
a very long time ago, and the decisions behind it would have been made quite instantaneously.
yeah,
And then as soon as the track's finished, which will probably be a day or two later, we're on to the next track and trying to do something else.
yeah. And you don't remember why that track was sort of reused?
No. Maybe they said they wanted something like this, and perhaps that's why.
Aside from composing a bunch of original music, you also adapted arcade soundtracks like Narc and Marble Madness, and even pinball machine music in the case of Pinbot. Did you like doing adaptations of, or like Nintendo adaptations of pre-existing music, or did you prefer to just write original music?
Well, I prefer writing original music, but if somebody wants me to do an adaptation of somebody else's music, then I clearly don't mind. It's much my job before working in the music shop, or no, between working at the music shop and at some point I was working in a crisp or a chip factory, depending where in the world you are. And I used to have to pick the bad ones off the belt, and I used to do it at night, and it wasn't a bad job. It paid well, but I didn't enjoy it at all. And then I got promoted to cleaning machines instead of picking chips off the belt. And, it was very hot, very smelly, and very unsociable. So to have a job that's involved with music by comparison is a dream job. So whether you're adapting somebody else's music, it was by comparison that there is no comparison. Which one would you rather do? So if somebody was to give me a job to do something music related, then I'm very happy to do it. Obviously, like to write my own music, because that's what really gets me going. But to adapt somebody else's music, I'm very happy to do, rather than pick chips off the belt.
Right. I read that you did that by ear, that you adapted the music by ear. Do you have perfect pitch?
I'm not sure what perfect pitch really is, but
well, I guess are you able to just identify notes just by hearing them?
Yeah, but I know lots of people who can do that, so I don't see it as any sort of magical thing. There's most people I know who write music or are involved in music can listen to something and play it back.
When you adapted the arcade soundtrack to Marble Madness for the Nintendo, what did you think of the original source music? Did you like it?
I really like it. It's really clever. Yeah, very good music.
How about Narc?
And it's very good, but I didn't really understand it. It was very unlike music that I dealt with before, but really sets a great mood, I think. Very clever.
Were you a fan of video game music at all when you were starting to, or did you become a fan of video game music working in this capacity and then, listening to arcade soundtracks and adapting them and stuff? Did that make you become a fan of them?
Not really. I always thought that, especially even during the Super NES days, that I'd rather listen to music that was performed either by an orchestra or a bunch of synths in a studio than to listen to chip music. It didn't excite me at all, really. If I was going to sit at home and listen to something, I wouldn't listen to chip music. I couldn't understand why people would.
Yeah.
It seemed to be a solution to a problem, as in, you couldn't put a CD in, and even on Super NES days, so you had to make the best job of the sound chip to make it sound as good as possible.
Were there any game soundtracks that did quite appeal to you?
I like Zelda, obviously I like Super Mario, but they were my reference points because we did a lot of work for Nintendo.
Yeah.
So I didn't really, if I'm honest, I didn't really listen to a lot of the competition just because we didn't have time. We'd finish something and be straight on to the next.
Just out of curiosity, you mentioned Jalico. Why was that a company that you had heard the music for, aside from Nintendo? Like, how did Jalico come into the mix there? They
were one of the early developers for the Nintendo, and the reference games that I had use of were either Nintendo's or Jalico.
Regarding doing music for Battletoads and Double Dragon, the Ultimate Team, had you been familiar with the Double Dragon franchise prior to that?
Never heard of it before. It's only when they said, well, we're doing this and listen to this, that I got involved with that.
There was no excitement about having this franchise that you've been working with, Battletoads, joining up with the Double Dragon franchise, and there was no reference point for you about that.
No, there's no reference point. Let's put it in context. I worked for Rare, and we were based in Twycross, which is in deepest Warwickshire, away from civilization. There used to be a store there, and there was a garden centre there, and a place that sold tractors, and the zoo a bit further down the road. And surrounding that was countryside, and it would be, I suppose the nearest town would have been Tamworth or Leicester, which were quite a drive away. So you were completely, when I went to work, I was in this bubble.
Yeah.
Away from, there's no internet, I couldn't reference the internet, and it was early days for the internet anyway. So there was no comparison, I wouldn't have known. And somebody brought in, Tim probably introduced me to Double Dragon, and that would have been the first I heard of it.
Did you, with the Double Dragon element being part of it, did that affect the music at all?
No, I'd have tried to reference the Double Dragon elements in there, but it would have been, if I was doing a game show conversion, it's the same sort of thing. This is the music we need to incorporate. Let's get busy.
Right. You did listen to some of the Double Dragon games.
The soundtracks, yeah.
The soundtracks,
absolutely.
yeah. I've never heard you use this arpeggio effect, but at one point, in one track here in this game, you do hear the arpeggio, what sounds like the arpeggio effect, and I'll play it. It's at the end of the track here. Right there. Did you hear that?
I did, yes. It's not something I would have done myself because it's a bit fast and frantic.
So this track might not even be yours.
No, that's my track. But the arpeggio being in there, maybe it might have been from Double Dragon, and I was asked to put it in.
Yeah, that's interesting.
It was a good idea at the time. I can also tell you that the maths has gone wrong in that track, which is why it's sounding even more frantic than it should. The channels aren't lining up, and sometimes we had to offset one anyway, which made the things even worse. So it's by that point in that tune, it's not quite there.
Did you do the conversions that were to the Genesis and the Game Boy for games that got ported?
The Genesis, I think so. I didn't do all of them, but I certainly did at least one or perhaps two of them.
Now, when transitioned into composing 16-bit music, specifically for the Super Nintendo, how did that affect your style?
Well, it was like being given a box of chocolates at Christmas. Instead of having, 4 very limited noises, suddenly you've got samples that you can use, and you've also doubled the amount of channels that you've got. So instead of sounding like a doorbell, you've got something that actually sounds like music by comparison. Mm-hmm. So it was like being given a great present on Christmas Day, and the whole sonic palette opened up enormously.
So you preferred working with samples rather than the simple waveforms that you were working with before?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It was. I couldn't wait to start working on the Super NES because working with those waveforms was annoying, really. Battletoads
and Battlemaniacs, that soundtrack sounds very different from other works of yours. Why is that? Was it because doing Super Nintendo, it was because it was newer for you, like you working with the samples? Is that why it ended up sounding so different than your previous stuff?
Yeah, I mean, if you look technically at the frequency range with the 4-channel stuff like the NES and the Game Boy, it's such a limited range. There's only so much you can do with it, and then suddenly you've been given a palette of samples. The frequency range has been opened out, and you've got all these other possibilities. So the solutions to get an NES sounding okay is completely different when you've got samples and a bit of memory to work with. It opens up a whole new world. So instead of being stuck with a limited set of parameters, you've got this, as I say, this huge sound palette and a huge frequency range to work with that you didn't have before. So obviously you can do things that you wish you could have done before, but could never have got away with.
And that really actually also had I guess it seems a strong effect on your style, I guess, right?
I guess so, yeah. Absolutely. You've if you can, to get something to work on a very limited system, it has to be short notes, very rhythmic. It's got to move along, and because you can't do slow notes, you can't do anything atmospheric really by comparison. It's got to be very brutal, really. There's no subtlety in it.
You have a handful of well-known franchises under your belt: RC Pro-Am, Battletoads, Wizards and Warriors. Your most well-known is Donkey Kong Country, right?
Absolutely.
Well, first of all, are you proud of all these franchises?
Well, I think, as any composer would probably tell you, you're very you take ownership of the product you're working on. You want to make it the best experience for the listener, as good as you could possibly do at that particular time. So I'd say I was proud of all of them. Are
you, at this point, because it's the Donkey Kong Country franchise is so well known, are you sick of talking about Donkey Kong Country?
No, not at all.
Okay, good, yeah. For the title theme of Donkey Kong Country, actually I'll play it real quick here. So here, whose idea was it to use the original Donkey Kong theme here, and not just use the melody, but recreate a sort of PSG chiptune version of it? So it starts off kind of sounding almost like a Nintendo here, or like a PSG. Yeah, was that your decision, or did they want you to incorporate the original theme?
I think we had to incorporate the original theme, and I'm not quite sure whose idea it was, whether it was Tim or mine.
Mm-hmm.
I can remember sampling the waveforms and making it sound like the original, because I thought it would be a good idea if you got sort of a few bars into it, a bit of a scratch, and then go into something a lot more contemporary.
It does come across as if to say, here's what Donkey Kong used to sound like. Now here's the new version. Here's what it's going to sound like now.
Absolutely. Yeah. So it was very much by design.
Was there any particular reason why they wanted to show that contrast? Or just to show, like, here's the new and improved Donkey Kong, basically, I guess?
I guess so, and also have a bit of fun with it, and a bit of humor as well.
Yeah, right. Okay, yeah, that makes sense, yeah. This one here, this does something really similar. This is DK Island Swing. It does something really similar to me that we heard from that Nightmare on Elm Street track. So you have, the piece as it's playing here, and then at one point it'll shift into this more atmospheric phase. It almost sounds like two pieces in one. There are two different pieces in one, and I'm curious about what the thought process was behind that.
Okay. Originally, when we knew we were developing for a jungle game, not necessarily Donkey Kong Country, but a jungle type game,
yeah,
Tim had asked me to write 3 pieces of music to demo. So I wrote, sketched out 3 demos for jungle type music. And he happened to like them all, so you've got there's 3 distinct sections in it, really.
Yeah,
and that's why they are. They're just the 3 different pieces of music attached to each other.
So they just basically liked all of them, and they just were like, let's use them all.
Yeah, absolutely. So at this point, we were still firing off material and demonstration material to Nintendo.
Yeah.
And Tim had asked me to put all 3 together, so I put all 3 together.
Oh, wow.
And Nintendo liked it, and it stayed as it was.
Oh, well, that's interesting. Wow. So this was actually supposed to be a different piece right here.
Oh yeah, absolutely. That's why there are 3 distinct sections.
Yeah. Okay, that's really interesting. I mean, to me, it works as an interesting, just singular piece. To have it have these different sort of phases or these different almost movements or something.
Yeah, but as a listener, that's all you've ever known. So
yeah.
The sort of concept or the context behind is that it was 3 pieces to demo what we could do on the Super NES, because I wasn't sure whether I was doing the music or whether somebody like Kondo-san would be doing the music for it, because obviously it's a very big franchise, so we might not have been doing the music. So Tim wanted some demonstration music to see whether we'd be able to get up to the standard that we needed.
And
So I think we managed that.
And they said, yeah, let's use this as it is. They didn't say, okay, we'll just split those up. They didn't. I mean, there was no talk of splitting them up afterwards. They just liked it as a full continuous piece. Yeah.
I think I had a very, very, very brief conversation. Say, do you want it as 3 separate tracks? And it was no, keep it as 3, and we'll loop it. And that was it.
Right.
On to the next.
In the Game Boy version of the game, it doesn't do that. It just loops over the sort of main part of the track. It just loops over without going into the sort of more atmospheric part of the track. Do you know why that was?
Well, just going back to what I said previously.
Yeah.
It was less subtle on on a 4-bit sound system. You would never be able to recreate it. So it was just impossible. So let's work with the sections we can recreate and forget about the ones we can't.
Aquatic ambience. I mean, even though you're not as familiar with the titles of these tracks as the listeners know them, you probably know that one because that's probably one of your most well-known pieces. It reminds me of the music of Mark Isham. Does that name ring a bell at all, or was it?
No, never heard of Mark Isham. I might have heard him, but wouldn't know it was him or associate. But no, it was never. It was. I had a synth called the Core Wave Station, and it uses really small waveforms and re-synthesizes them back together again. And Aquatic Ambience was an experiment to make the Super NES sound, because I was still programming hex at this point, still firing off subroutines.
Oh, wow,
and so Aquatic Ambience was just an experiment to make it sound like the chord wave station, which is why you hear the waves stepping through each other. It was quite early days on that one. And there's a lot of crossfading going on where you take one sound, even though it's very small, and then you crossfade into the next. And then you crossfade into the next, and it gives the sound movement. And you can smudge it over using a vocal sound as well. So although you don't really hear the vocal sound, you can hear the sound morphing from one tone to the next. And that was something that you wouldn't have been able to do if you were using MIDI.
So this track was actually this is just really you experimenting.
Yes.
Wow.
Technical exercise.
Wow, that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, and then once you realise that you can do it, then you think, I can do this now, and all these melodies start coming in. You think, I can put that melody on, and then we can put that in the background, and it opens doors. You've got something that doesn't sound like somebody else or anything else on the Super NES. You think, that's great, we can do this now, and we can put this on top, and stuff like that.
Was this one of the first pieces you composed for this soundtrack?
It's the second one. It came after the jungle one.
The jungle one, yeah. Okay, wow. Yeah.
So I spent 5 weeks composing this. It was over the Christmas period, so it was fortunately a quiet period because people were getting ready for Christmas and the Christmas parties and people going off for the Christmas holiday. So I can remember working for 5 weeks just before Christmas, all the way over Christmas and the first week of January, coming up with this tune.
So this piece just alone was you spent 5 weeks on, not the entire soundtrack.
Yeah. No. Just this piece alone, working out how to get the sound chip to work. Sound very different to how we'd been using it before.
Do you feel like you spent more time on this track than other tracks in your career?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 5 weeks in those days would have been a huge amount of time spent just on one singular track.
Yeah, right.
And it was a luxury I normally wouldn't have got. It was just coincidental that given the set of circumstances I had at that time, I could dedicate some time to really, because we didn't have long, we had a year to do the whole Donkey Kong Country, so to actually have a period of time where I could experiment was, worked out quite well.
I'm sorry, how long did you say you had to do the entire soundtrack?
A year.
A year, wow. Now that's...
Yeah.
And back in the Nintendo days, you would have a week sometimes to do an entire soundtrack, right?
That's right, but here we are on the Super NES. You've got 8 channels, so your work has increased exponentially.
Yeah.
You're still typing away in hex. You've got samples, you've got to take the samples, you've got to convert them to run on a PCM compressed system. Make sure they work, and there's lots of work involved in that, making sure that they do sound and get the boundary points for the loops and everything. So it took a lot more work to get that that in. So even though you've got a year, it was a very fast and very quick year.
What's the longest you ever had for an NES game?
Probably 3 weeks max. Normally 1 week or 2 weeks.
Yeah. Going back to Donkey Kong Country, Gangplank Galleon.
Yeah, sure.
It's an interesting choice to start with a more traditional sounding pirate style piece of music. It sort of parallels the title theme in that it's using something old and then bringing modern life into it. Since it was at the end of the game, was that comparison intentional to sort of sandwich the game, kind of use that?
No, it was
structure?
far more straightforward than that. You start the game outside on the chip from memory, and at least that's the brief I was working to at the time. And so we needed a traditional style sea shanty, and then when we started fighting, we needed something that was a bit more of a battle tune. So that's why it starts off with one and then goes into the other.
Okay.
So it's a gameplay.
Okay, it was meant to just parallel what was going on just with the action.
Yeah, there's no hidden subliminal thing there. It's just that's what the gameplay required. So that's what we did.
You did music to roughly 60 games during the third and fourth generation era, perhaps, or
Yeah,
maybe more even. How did you manage to churn out so many tunes?
Some of them, like not Marble Madness and the game show conversions, obviously they belong to other people.
Because you had to do so many tunes, were there some that you might not have put as much thought into, or did you give as much attention to everything you composed?
I think, given the time that you've got to do something, you'll do your best job to try and make it as good as possible. That's still the same to this day. I don't think, I've only got this much time. In fact, I'll refuse jobs if I haven't got enough time to do them.
Right, okay. So it wasn't like you gave certain soundtracks less attention or certain tracks less attention because you were having to do so many. You put as much attention to all of them.
Yeah, I never knew what I was going to do from, one day to the next, really, or from 1 week to the next. So it wasn't a conscious thing to think, well, we've got less time to do this, I'll not do as good a job. It was, this is what we're working on now. What's the best I can do with this today?
And you mentioned this earlier, but you're not as proud of some of your earlier work, like Slalom, for example.
Well, the thing is, the whole it's development system, so it's a learning curve. So obviously, when I did it, I thought it was the best I could do at that particular time. But then, when you listen to it in retrospect, when you listen to something like Time Lord and the manipulation of the sound chip that's taken several years to learn, you think, looking back now, that's pretty good. There's a lot of experience that has gone into that. And then you listen to the early stuff, and of course, I didn't have that experience. So when I listen to it now, it's it's I don't know. It's not that I'm not proud of it, but I'd have done it completely different. But that's the benefit of hindsight. Yeah,
right. What are the games that you look back on now that you are still quite proud of, even by today's standards?
I haven't really thought of that or thought of an answer for that, but I'd need to specifically go back through them, and as you say, there's quite a lot, really.
Yeah. Well, because there's so many games you did, have you completely forgotten some of the things you wrote at this point?
Oh, completely, yeah. It was, you'd get in there and you've got a week to do this, and you'd be there, I'd be working on stuff, maybe 12 hours a day, and I'd do that 6 or 7 days a week, and there's no way you can keep a mental log of what you've done.
Right.
You're just composing for a solution at that point.
Which are the ones that you remember well, and why?
Well, obviously the DKC stuff, because I'd got a new palette to work with.
Right.
To do it.
What about during the Nintendo era?
How do you mean what the NES era?
NES era, yeah, exactly.
Wizards and Warriors, I like that series. That was quite cool.
Why do you remember that one particularly, I guess?
One of them because one of the pieces I'd written when I was 15, and it does use an arpeggio, and it uses counterpoint as well. Mm-hmm. And it was a way of taking a single channel and making it sound more than it was, but it's not very quick. It's quite a slow arpeggio, very Bach-like. and it seems to translate quite well to the NES system. And that was nice. It was quite a decent tune, really, compared to a lot of game music. It seemed to work, and that was it with the NES system. Some tunes worked and lent itself towards the system more than others would. Whereas if you were to do the tunes on a different system, especially if it was more atmospheric, it would have worked. But you have to work to the sound chip that you're working on.
Are there any kind of obscure titles for the NES that you tend to, for
I
some
think
reason, remember really well, but maybe aren't as well known as some of your other work?
There was one called Solar Jetman, and I can remember Tim asking me to keep things as atmospheric as possible. So again, it was one of those technical solutions, really, of not really going for tunes, but to actually go for the sound design. So it was half sound design, half music as a soundtrack, rather than specifically music. And it just meant you had to think quite differently. And we had a few more weeks to do it. Probably had 3 weeks to do that soundtrack. And it was good. And of course, all of these things, you're going back, you say you're not proud of the first ones, but it was all a learning curve. It all led up to doing the DKC stuff. And without that, you couldn't have just gone in and wrote DKC without having that experience behind you.
Mm-hmm. Did you play the games that you worked on?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I still play all the games I work on and have more besides. And it's very important to play the games, because if you don't play the games, you'd never have an indication of the tempo of the pieces that you should be writing. It's got to be to the gameplay, and if it doesn't match the gameplay, then you're probably not you're missing the brief.
Even during the NES, you were playing the games before composing the music, or to get a sense of the game.
Yeah, I'm not the best game player in the world, so I might start playing the game and then somebody else would have to show me what we're doing. Battletoads.
I was going to ask, did you play Battletoads?
I did. I was actually all right at that.
Oh, really?
It was extremely hard at first.
How far could you get in it?
I'd probably get about halfway.
Oh, really? Wow. Okay.
Wow. Certainly not any further.
What about Taboo: The Sixth Sense? You ever play that, or not play? It's not really a game exactly, but what's up with Taboo: The Sixth Sense? Did you experience that?
I didn't know. No, I got the concept for it and understood it, and we were trying to make it sound quite otherworldly or spooky, or I don't know,
new agey.
Yeah.
What about Time Lord? Did you play Time Lord?
That's I was good. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I played Time Lord, absolutely. Yeah.
Could you get far in that?
Probably not. I'd probably get about a third of the way through and then think this is too hard and I've got work to do.
You want a copy of it?
Sorry?
Do you want a copy of it?
I wouldn't mind. Why, is there a copy around? Is there one online?
Oh no, we've got a copy, an NES copy.
Wow, I haven't got an NES to play it on, so it'll be lost on me. But thank you.
Okay.
Just out of curiosity, of all the games that you did music for, what was your favorite game to play?
What, that I wrote, or?
Yeah, that you did the music to. So when you were playing a game prior to composing the music for it, what was the one that you thought was the most fun, and also did that pump you up and inspire you more to make the music better?
I think when you play something, just being generic at this point, rather than specific, when you play something and you can see that it's going to be a winner, that really is inspiring. That really does fire you up.
So what game was like that for you?
I like doing Battletoads. That was good. I enjoyed that one, especially the Super NES version. I was very excited about that, and also because we did it on the arcade as well. And I can remember playing the arcade thing and thinking, "Oh, that looks great."
Yeah. So you knew that was going to be a good one, and that's neat. That pumped you up. That made you think, "I'm going to make this soundtrack really good."
Well, I think that for all of them. So
yeah.
I think, as soon as I see a game or a concept, I'm thinking, I can normally, even from the initial thing, I'll start getting ideas. But there are some games that you just know when they're released, they're going to do well.
Right.
Even if they don't get released. Which is a shame, because we've worked on some good games that really should have been released and haven't, and they would have done very well.
Did you enjoy playing Time Lord?
As I remember, yeah.
Yeah.
It's such a long time ago. I can't quite remember if I'm completely honest. But I can remember at the time thinking it was all right.
Yeah. It's kind of hard, yeah.
Yeah, but then the trouble is, we're in our bubble, and we're so used to playing games that are quite hard, you forget that other people might play it, which is good because now we have games testers and stuff like that, and they can tell you when it's too hard.
Right. I just wanted to run just a few tracks by you just to see if you composed them or not. I think you probably did. On the internet, it was hard to like verify if you had. So, did you do this track? Is that?
What game was it from? I think so.
This is Championship Pro-Am for the Genesis?
Yeah, that'd have been me, yeah.
That's you? Okay. And then what about this one here? Let's see. So, okay, I was curious about this. This is the game Pirates for Nintendo.
Yeah, that's me, definitely.
Well, there's, because I think this is an original, or is this an adaptation from a different version of the game?
Which one? I can't hear it.
Sorry. Does this ring a bell at all?
Vaguely. As far as I know, it's original, but I couldn't be specifically remember.
Right. This is the beginning of it again, just... And then I was curious about this one as well. Yeah, do you know if that was original or if that was adaptation?
What game is it from?
The same thing, Pirates, yeah.
It's probably original.
Yeah.
It must have been quite early on because I'm missing some of the later tricks that I used.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I was just curious about those tracks. I was curious about them just because those games existed on different platforms before, and if it was adapted music or not. Yeah.
I can't honestly remember the specifics. I'd have just, this is what we're doing today, get on with it, and by 2 days later I'd have forgotten all about it.
Right.
And we'll be working on something else. So as far as I know, they're original, but I can't 100% guarantee they're not.
Thanks a lot, David. Was there anything you'd like to mention or promote or anything before we end here?
No, because obviously I sign NDAs for everything. So
right.
There's lots that I'd love to promote. I can't talk about anything.
Did listening to some of this stuff remind you of stuff you had forgotten about?
Oh yeah, completely. Yeah, absolutely.
Did you kind of like hearing some of this old stuff?
Mixed feelings, because I'd go back and finish it off now, and I suppose that's we were talking about this the other day. When do you finish a track? And it's really when somebody comes and takes it out of your hands and say, "Well, we haven't got more time." And that's really when you finish your track. When somebody says, "We need this now," otherwise I'd carry on improving something until until the next track needs writing, really. So I'd go back and do it differently. But as I said earlier, that's the benefit of hindsight, isn't it?
Yeah, sure.
So something I listen to, and I think, I wish I'd have done that, but then I hadn't learned the techniques. So it's you work with what the tools you've got at the time, don't you?
Right. Well, look, thanks very much for taking the time to talk to us. And
you're welcome.
And answer these questions. Yeah.
It's been very enjoyable. Thank you.